That's right. And also, a lot of those people were killed because they wanted to get rid of the kulaks.
Absolutely. There's a plane that brings in Churchill from London. He's being greeted by, again, the Russian command, Molotov. Stalin did not come to this naval base.
Now, Russia and Germany invaded Poland at the same time, or roughly
Yes.
the same time?
When Hitler blitzed Poland, starting at September 1, 1939, at the same time, Russian armies were going into eastern Poland, while Hitler's armies were coming into western Poland.
It's interesting because even today on television, they forget that. They ignore that point, they ignore the number of peasants, and yet those facts are very easy to be found.
Absolutely, very definitely, yes. Here's the president arrived and is now in a jeep, shaking hands with the Russian commander, Molotov. They're now going to greet, or rather salute, the honor guard, Russian honor guard. The anthem is being played, the American, the British, and the Russian. The president looked kind of haggard. Now, the passenger, the president and Churchill take the salute of the Russian honor guard. Here we sit down to talk to a man who was responsible for the murder of probably no less than 20 million Russians, 7 million kulaks or peasants, rich peasants they call them.
The farmers that he wanted to...
Farmer, the rich farmer. The farmer who, after liberation in 1861, had achieved, you might say, economic independence, so to speak. And so many, the aristocracy and the upper middle class, not less than 20 million were killed by Stalin in the period from 1928, when he took over and started his collectivization program, until the war started in Europe in 1939. And then, of course, the millions of Russian soldiers who were killed, of course, in that war. And the point I'm making is that when they start telling us what a burden they carried, the number of people that perished, why don't we come back and say, who brought on the war? And I always go back to the pact with Hitler.
What are these scenes of ruin?
You see, Germany had occupied all that area, almost all the way to Caucasus. And when they were coming back, of course, when the Russians were driving them back after Stalingrad, all that area was bombed, and by the time we got, this was in 43 and part of 44, and the ruins were still evident when we were there in February of 1945. This is a cartoon that the Russians put up showing that the Germans were coming from the west. Now the Russians are going back to the west, driving the Germans back. Now this is the Black Sea, where Yalta is located, right in the Black Sea. This is on the way to Yalta now. This is the entrance to the gardens, beautiful gardens of the Tsar's palace.
But of course this was February, so it was very...
This was February the 3rd. Right now, February the 3rd, 1945. The conference didn't start until next day, February the 4th. During the occupation, it was occupied by Marshal von Manstein, while the Germans were in occupation of that area.
These pictures are in incredibly good shape.
I still, as I say, have that, I have still film, still pictures, and I have the moving pictures, 60mm film.
Was there an awareness of the concentration camps, the Russian?
Not in that area, no, because most of the concentration camps were in Siberia and in the northern part of the Arctic area.
So Roosevelt really didn't get an idea of what Russia was like.
Oh, absolutely none. None. He didn't have any way of knowing anything except a very small area, the air base and around Yalta. Here we were coming in, you see, the naval group. I was with General Marshall.
Now, you said that since you were born in Russia, some of the Russians recognized who you were?
Well, I had several interesting incidents. When our plane landed at the naval base, and an American sergeant, we had already a small group, the Signal Corps were there, establishing communication lines and so forth, and the sergeant came to get my luggage, and he whispered to me. He says, "Colonel," says, they know who you are." General Marshall, General Somerville, and myself, we were entering the palace. The general turned over his secret papers to me, and I was carrying his briefcase. There's another of our naval groups, naval captains coming in, aides to our admirals. We were all lodged in the main palace headquarters. The president is now coming in. There was the last of the convoy bringing the president of the United States. He's in the front car with his daughter Bettiger and the secret agents, Secret Service men behind him. In an open Jeep, he traveled the 4 hours, despite the fact that he had just been recovering, or still actually had a very bad cold. Jimmy Burns, who was with the president from the day he left Washington, told me on the last day that the president had been sick most of the time on the ship, and most of the time during the Yalta Conference he was still having a very bad cold. Now this is the place where we were lodged, the former Palace of the Tsars. The Tsar, the president, occupied the quarters of the Tsar, and we, military and other personnel, occupied the second floor. My room was right next to George Marshall because I had to be with him all the time. Every day, around 11 o'clock, they would be coming in for the conference. And the conference was held in the ballroom of the palace. Here is Stalin coming in with his retinue. Mm-hmm. And this was repeated every day for 8 days.
What kind of a man was Stalin?
Well, you never can tell exactly. He had a poker face. He hardly ever smiled. There was no, you couldn't see any feeling at all in his expression. To me, he looked really dumb. Churchill with Anthony Eden and other members of his staff. The British group. This was repeated every morning, just like this. And we were taking pictures, or the army were taking, some of these pictures were taken by me and some for the Army Signal Corps. This was repeated day after day for 8 days. This is the guard. Every 2 hours there was a change of the guard at all the buildings where either conferences were held or where the delegations were lodged.